The new fragments mods added in Lightfall have made this build even stronger than before. Now you don't have to run Empowerment Rift anymore to spam grenades, and your grenades will now heal you when you pick up one of the new fragments. The way to unlock this new fragment is by going to Ikora and buying them, then meditating to acquire them to your subclass. And after you do all that, you can start crafting your build. Now, before we get into the build, let's first discuss how this build works and how to use it properly. For this build to work properly, we'll be combining 3 different things. The Starfire Protocol exotic, which gives us a second fusion grenade and grenade energy back when we deal empowered damage, aka from a well or an empowerment grid. The second thing we need is a void secondary, so think of Funnel Web, the Doom of Chelsea, which you can pick up from the King's Fall raid, or the Unforgiven, which is you can pick that up from the Duality dungeon. And you're going to need to combine this with the exotic primary with the Horde. And if you don't have the Wither Horde, then you can acquire this by getting an exotic cipher from Xur or from the battle pass and completing the objectives it requires and turning it in for an exotic of your choice, which would be the exotic we need today, which is Wither Horde. And lastly, we need the seasonal artifact mod unlocked called Volatile Flow. So when we pick up an Orb of Power, our void weapons will now have volatile rounds, which makes enemies explode, and this increases our ad clear potential. With this build, we now have access to something that was primarily tied to a void subclass, so now we can use it on any subclasses because Lightfall has given us that nice seasonal perk, and we're able to slay out with volatile rounds even on our Solar Subclass. Now once you have all of those 3 things, you now have everything you need to make this build work. Now the way you want to use this build is by spawning a lot of Orbs of Power, so you can either spawn these Orbs of Power by yourself. Your teammates also should be spawning Orbs of Power if you are running in a stacked team. If you aren't running in a stacked team, then you are going to have to spawn these Orbs of Power by yourself. The primary way we will be spawning these Orbs of Power will be by slaying out with our Void weapon. So we will be using Void Siphon on our helmet. And if you aren't spawning enough Orbs of Power with your Void energy weapon, then you can pick up firepower as well on your gauntlet, so you're able to spawn Orbs of Power by using your grenade and getting grenades killed. And once we spawn those Orbs of Power, we want to pick up those Orbs of Power, and since we are going to be using the seasonal perk Volatile Flow, we now will gain those volatile rounds to our void weapons, and we're able to pretty much slay out and kill a lot of enemies at any given time. Now that's what we're going to do when we're not doing DPS. However, when it comes to DPS, we want to stick the boss with Wither Horde, and then we want to swap to our void weapons to deal massive damage, combining those volatile explosions onto the boss. If you guys remember that, not really that glitch going on Retrofit Escapade, but by dealing a mass amount of damage with a void weapon, you can cause infinite explosions onto a boss. We're not going to be causing that much explosion, but we are going to be making the boss volatile if you have volatile rounds on your void weapons, and dealing damage with that and with the Horde combined is going to allow us the ability to consistently spam our fusion grenades on the boss. And this is the most basic DPS for the Starfire Protocol build. You stick your Wither Horde to the boss, you swap to a void weapon or your secondary weapon, and you deal damage with that secondary weapon. And while you're dealing damage, you're also spamming grenades, and by dealing that consistent damage, because you're dealing damage over time with the Wither Horde, and you're going to be dealing consistent damage with your energy weapon, you are able to just spam grenades. And like I said, this is just the most basic form of DPS with the Starfire Protocol. You can then combine a Demolitionist rocket launcher, and you're now able to deal massive damage across the board. If you do have a demolitionist rocket, please keep in mind that the demolitionist perk does have a short cooldown duration, which kind of caught me off guard. A lot of the times when I am spamming grenades with the rocket launcher, there is sort of a cooldown, so do keep that in mind. Now that you have everything you need for this build and how it works, let's jump into the fragments and the mods to bring this build together. In this Dawnblade subclass, we are going to be using Healing Rift, so we have another way to heal ourselves if we can't consistently kill enemies with our grenades. We are going to be using Celestial Fire, and we're going to combine that with fusion grenades. Now we are able to stun all 3 champions with this build because our solar explosions are going to stop unstoppable enemy. So by hitting an unstoppable enemy with 2 grenades and hitting it with your melee, you're able to stun that unstoppable champion. We're going to combine that with Touch of Flame, so our fusion grenades are going to explode twice. This is why we're rocking Touch of Flame. And then we have Icarus Dash. The second aspect is up to you, but we're rocking Icarus Dash so we can gain 2 fragment slots. Now this is the fragment I was talking about, a new fragment that just got added in Lightfall. So our final blow with our fusion grenade can heal us. Ember of Resolute, this is the first fragment we need to pick up. The second fragment we do have is Ember of Charge, so our solar ignition spreads scorch to afflicted target, and a large solar explosion which deals damage in an an area around the target stuns unstoppable champions. That's how we're able to stun unstoppable champions, and that is the first champion we can defeat. This third fragment we do have is Ember of Ashes, so we do apply more scorched axe to targets, and this is really great when trying to stun unstoppable champions. The last fragment we do have is Ember of Eruption, so our solar ignitions have an increased area effect, which also helps us stun unstoppable champions. We are rocking a Void submachine gun, so we do have overload rounds, and that's how we're able to stun overload champions. And if you are using a gun, a Void gun, and you do pick up an overpower and you gain volatile rounds, those volatile rounds can now pierce anti-barrier champions. We're able to stun all 3 champions with this build. Now, to dive into the mod system, we are going to be using double ashes to assets on our helmet, so we're able to gain a lot of super energy all the time. We are going to use Void Siphon because we are rocking a Void weapon in this build and we want to gain volatile rounds and spawn a lot of orbs of power. We are using 3 grenade kickstarters. If you feel like you're not spawning enough orbs of power with your Void weapon, depending on the type of content, you can always swap this out for firepower. And then we do have grenade kickstarter, and the great thing about grenade kickstarter is that even though you might not have armor charge, you can still gain grenade energy back from using that. The third armor mod we do have is charged up, so we can increase the maximum stacks we are carrying by 1. So instead of having 3 armor stacks, we are going to bump up to 4, and we're going to combine that with stacks on stacks. Now, having 4 stacks of armor charge and using 3 grenade kickstarters, we are able to gain 50% of our grenade refunded to us. That's the great thing about running 3 grenade kickstarters. But if you feel like you're not spawning enough orbs of power with your Void energy weapon, then by all means put on firepower so you're able to spawn more orbs of power with your grenades. Now, combining stacks on stacks with charged up, we are able to increase our armor charge from 3 to 4, and we only need to pick up 2 orbs of power to gain the maximum stacks of our armor charge. We are going to be using 2 distributions on our class item combined with 1 bomber, so we are able to just cycle through all of our abilities very quickly. And that pretty much wraps it up for the build. If you guys liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.